All right, so let's go ahead and talk about our next story, geoengineering. This is another topic that I've been covering for quite some time, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I do want to mention it because I think it's an important story. This actually happened last month in December, but I didn't see anybody else talking about it, so I figured I need to write about it. The European Union's scientific advisors call for a moratorium on solar geoengineering and aerosol injection. And I know that the funny thing is, like, some of the responses I've been seeing when I share this article around is, well, Derrick, how can they have a moratorium on something that they claim they're not even doing? And I get it. It's kind of a funny thing to say, but the reality is that they're still not claiming they're doing it. This is the European Union claiming that there should be a moratorium on further research into geoengineering. And for those who are new into this topic, geoengineering, I think, is the better word to use. I personally don't use the word chemtrails. I know people think that that might be useful, or that's just like, it's a specific description of chemical trails. I understand. But I do think in many circles, in many cases, it will make you sound crazy. And I always think strategically about how I can reach people. And the fact is, what we might call chemtrails or weather modification is known as geoengineering. It is a specific science of engineering the geo, the earth, the planet, the biology, really, what it comes down to, because they're trying to modify us as well and make us genetically engineered humans with maybe putting in nanobots and smart dust and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. What it comes down to, though, is that geoengineering is a specific science, and there's different ways to do it. There's also, like, I've written about this before too, that if I was to discuss this, I would say that let's put weather modification as the bigger, broader bubble, or like the kind of banner. Weather modification is what all these things fit under. Under weather modification, you have something called cloud seeding, and cloud seeding has been admitted and known for a long time. Yeah, a lot of normies don't even know about it, but there was cloud seeding during the Vietnam War and other times. Operation Popeye, I believe, and others. You can go out and find document information. A lot of people don't know about that. So that's weather modification. You got cloud seeding. I would say that's the most benign. I'm not going to say harmless, but I think the most benign type of weather modification, climate modification that has been happening for decades, for 60 years now, and going back. And I've written about this as well, that at least since the late 1800s, people were studying how to modify weather. And the US government started studying how to modify hurricanes as well. I reported on that years ago. So in addition to that, under weather modification, you also have geoengineering. And then under geoengineering, you would have things like solar radiation management, which is, or aerosol injection. That's what most people consider chemtrails. But geoengineering also does include other things like ocean deacidification, just different things. So it's not just what we call chemtrails. This is like a broader, bigger science. But if you were trying to be direct and specific, we would be using the word solar geoengineering or stratospheric aerosol injection. I know that's a lot of words there, but solar geoengineering is basically what we're talking about. And that is where they spray chemicals and compounds out of planes in order to try to block the sun's light in some alleged attempt to try to reduce what they call as climate change. So here's the story. A group of scientists and policymakers have recommended the European Union support a Europe-wide moratorium on using a controversial geoengineering technique known as solar geoengineering. The scientists warn that the benefits and risks of solar geoengineering proposals are, quote, highly uncertain, and they state that deploying this technology could impact the climate in different parts of the world and, quote, would be difficult to predict and difficult to manage in practice. They also said that any future research on solar geoengineering should be rigorous, ethical, and explicit about the uncertainties, and that they should reassess the risks and opportunities every 5 to 10 years. So this was released in December 2024 by what's called the Scientific Advice Mechanism, which is, I'd never even heard of this, and I doubt most people, even in the EU, have heard of this, but the Scientific Advice Mechanism is an organization which provides allegedly independent scientific evidence and policy recommendations to the College of European Commissioners. The Scientific Advice Mechanism is made up of 3 subgroup organizations, including the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors, who are 7 scientists whose whole job is to make recommendations to the EU. So it is that group of chief scientific advisors that wrote this report for the EU and released it in 2024, just a month ago. And as I said, there has been support and opposition to geoengineering technologies. You have like these scientists like David Keith over at Harvard, who's been trying to do geoengineering testing. You've got people starting to push back, like Tennessee passed a law that mentioned geoengineering that a lot of people were talking about last year. So the support and the resistance to geoengineering has been growing. Now, again, in the mainstream perspective, they claim they're not doing any of this already. They claim that what we call chemtrails, or what I think is actual secret geoengineering programs, they claim that we're just nuts, that that's just normal contrails from regular planes, even though they're not flying in a pattern that makes any sense, and they're doing X's and marks in the sky. That would be solar radiation management or solar geoengineering. Again, as I said, SAI is stratospheric aerosol injection, which is a specific solar geoengineering practice involving spraying aerosols into the sky in an attempt to deflect the sun's rays. They've talked about spraying strontium, barium, and aluminum, among other things, to block sunlight and send it back. And so this report from the EU Scientific Advice Mechanism says, quote, for decades, technologies have been proposed that would reduce or counteract global warming by reflecting sunlight away from the Earth. These proposals, known as solar radiation modification technologies, include stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud brightening, and others. That's what I was mentioning earlier. There's a few types of these. And so the scientists warn that, quote, they could have negative impacts on ecosystems, change rainfall patterns, and hamper food production. And, quote, any large-scale intervention in our common planetary environment would have systemic consequences. And I feel like I'm a freaking broken record. I know I'm not the only one out there, because there's many other people who've been paying attention to this for a while now. But I wrote articles in 2016 talking about studies that were saying that geoengineering could cause the loss of blue skies and things like that, because and you could create, like, maybe you could lower the temperature in one area, but then also you might create a drought in another place or massive rainfall in another area, right? It's unpredictable. So the only kind of conflict that we have here between the conspiracy theorists and the mainstream folks and scientists is that they say solar geoengineering is only in the research phase and not in live research, like just in the lab. We're just thinking and testing things on computer models and stuff like that. They claim there's no actual geoengineering programs, whereas the people who are believers in the so-called chemtrails conspiracy theory say, it looks like those planes sure are doing patterns in the sky and spraying things on random times and random days and locations all around the world. And the mainstream says those are just contrails. You guys are just stupid. You don't understand science. It forms ice crystals. And yes, that is true. But you can tell the difference between a contrail and something that lasts and just hangs there. And then in a couple hours, it's just dragged out by the wind into these wide, quote unquote, clouds. And then before you know it, it might rain the next day or something like that. People are seeing this stuff all over the world. And so that's like the main difference, though, is that according to the mainstream, this is only in the research phase. There's no live active programs going on. The rest of us crazy people who think that something that we're seeing in the sky doesn't look normal, well, I guess we're just nuts. But nevertheless, that is why I write articles like that, because I want to reach the person who, maybe even somebody who thinks that we are crazy and they're like, oh, there's no chemtrails, Derrick, that's not happening. You guys are a little bit nuts. Okay, well, even if you believe that, even if you don't believe the programs are actually happening, I'm going to convince you that it's a bad idea based on what's being said. So, because even if you just take the normie mainstream perspective, oh, these programs are only in the research phase, nothing's actually happening. Well, even according to their own research, it's not a good thing, and it's very dangerous, and people like freaking Bill Gates are trying to push it for different reasons. So you don't have to convince your friends necessarily in the chemtrails conspiracy theory, like right off the bat, if they're not willing to look up and see with their own eyes, which is what is obvious to the rest of us. Then help them see that even according to the mainstream, just say, hey, look, I know you care about climate change, right? I know that you're into that whole thing and you believe that the world's coming to an end. Well, guess what? One of the things that they're proposing is called geoengineering. It's called stratospheric aerosol injection. And according to some studies, this could cause a loss of blue skies. This could create droughts in Africa and other, countries in the global south. You care about indigenous people, don't you, right? You care about minority groups, don't you? Well, this idea that's being proposed, it is a horrible idea, and it can lead to bad things. And then maybe with time, somebody might actually start to realize, wait, this sounds a lot like what those lines in the sky you keep telling me about. So, and for me, it's a very conscious and strategic way of trying to reach people. It's not an article that says the European Union calls for banning chemtrails, because that's only going to reach certain people, and you won't be able to share that with your normie friends. So I wrote it in a way that is more accessible, hopefully.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.